Summer insects buzz over new fragrant flowers and fallen soldiers.
The old carp is wise. He whispers his dark secrets. Only the wind hears. These quotes greeted me twice in loading screens in Total War Shogun 2, both times loading back to the overmap after having fought the enemies of my empire, in this case the Hattori, who were angry that my Iko-Ikian monks were attempting to incite riots throughout their empire. In total, across both of these battles, I lost 3,000 men. The enemy faced casualties upwards of 8,000. In the fields of northern Japan, these bodies were left, caked in dirt and blood, left to rot. The twang of gentle music highlights this brilliantly framed scene. It is a humble, calm, and almost seems wise. It is telling me that what we did was necessary. One might even simplify it as, so it goes. The Creative Assembly released Total War Shogun 2 in March of 2011. The game is a continuation of their very popular Total War series. The game places you in charge of one of 9 clans, or 11 if you have all of the DLC clans. The goal of the game is rather simple: take over Kyoto and become the Shogun. The journey, on the other hand, is not so simple. This is because the 8 other clans are attempting to do the exact same thing and will sacrifice anything to do so. The game, outside of combat, takes place on a grand strategy map. This map is very similar to that of the Civilization series, featuring cities spread around with borders clearly highlighted and larger-than-life characters to indicate where units are located. One of the small differences that adds a very nice touch to the overmap is how it handles unexplored locations. Rather than simply have landmasses cloaked in darkness or not rendered at all, Shogun 2 covers them in something similar to a hand-drawn map, which adds a very nice aesthetic feel to unexplored territory rather than the intangible black mass that is common. Everything happens on this overmap. Units move to and fro, upgrades for cities are bought, and diplomacy is done. This is the text-heavy, slower part of the game where all the planning happens. The tried-and-true elements that make the game so successful remain, and show very little in terms of innovation on the traditional move, research, diplomacy structure. But I suppose if it isn't broken, then why try and fix it? City management plays a huge role in almost every aspect of the game. To recruit specific units, you have to have the correct buildings. Obviously, different cities can have unique buildings to each city, but it is important to take into account that only the city with any special building may produce the special unit type. And, of course, diplomacy works as one might expect, allowing players to organize trade route, alliances, and war. The AI in Total War Shogun 2 is much more lenient than that of the Civilization series, and they tend to accept agreements that are beneficial to both clans, rather than just those outrageously tilted in one side's favor. The game steps away from the traditional format of the overworld RTS when entering combat. Total War games have always been famous for their massive battles that handle like a more traditional RTS, but have the deep strategic elements and phenomenal amount of detail that has been in the series since its founding. And this holds true in Shogun 2. The huge, beautiful environments make their return better than ever, and still offer a huge array of opportunities to use both weather and foliage to gain advantage over your enemy. Combat itself is as intricate as always. Units clash with epic force and slowly degrade into one-on-one combat between samurai. Fighting is beautifully animated, especially for an RTS, and features quite a few different killing blow animations, some of which look pretty brutal. And if you have the Blood DLC, you can actually see some people being decapitated, and blood is everywhere. Strategy also plays a huge role here, though. Enemies are much easier to rout than to fully kill, so the player must take advantage of flanking, cavalry charges, matchlock infantry, overwhelming numbers, cannons, to force enemy morale low enough to scare them into routing. This effectively removes an entire unit from combat without, at times, even having to engage it. The game also has naval combat, which unfortunately is sluggish and not particularly responsive. In most cases, it seemed much easier to generally killed fewer of my men by just auto-resolving naval conflicts. The combination of beautiful scenery, elegant music score, and brutal combat is a gift to the senses, making combat a one-of-a-kind experience in this genre. It's almost magically calm, despite the brutal things happening throughout the land as clans conquest towards Kyoto. Multiplayer, one of the game's bigger features, features a campaign very much similar to single player that allows players and clans to fight for control of the nation. It also has a progression system for generals, allowing the player to give small bonuses to different units within their army, as well as customize the armor that their general is wearing, so the aesthetic thing is there for those wondering. Connectivity is generally good, though the experience gap between new players and veterans made me steer largely clear of multiplayer in favor of the single-player campaign and scenarios. Unfortunately, it isn't all sunshine and blood-curdling screams of agony. Despite the intricate and usually quite functional systems that are in place, problems are still very much present. The pathing AI, especially that of bowmen, can prove incredibly troublesome. This is because the archer's AI requires that all enemies of a unit be within the firing range, even if those enemies are spread across a combat line. This means that archers tend to get much closer than necessary to begin showering arrows down, not to mention the fact that arrows can hit friendly units, so the time spent moving into position is exceptionally important to maximize damage before the enemy gets close enough that you have to stop shooting. The game also requires that movement be micromanaged to a point that it can make moving units into position for flanking a chore. This is made slightly more annoying by the way units that are considered in combat is handled. If you are moving a unit within close proximity of an enemy to flank, and a single enemy from that unit manages to attack one of the soldiers closer towards the edge of your line, then the entire unit in question is immediately pulled into combat with the assailant unit. This means that close combat maneuvers, because of this, are essentially impossible, or at the very best, especially difficult. And this definitely goes true for cavalry too, which makes the shock cavalry charges very difficult to use at times. The troubling troop movement can make unit positioning, which is incredibly important for decisive victories, difficult, and sometimes it feels like a chore. It is a small price to pay, however, for the overwhelming scale and breadth of the strategy elements, all of which are remarkably easy to grasp, and make the game well worth the asking price of the small issues. Shogun 2 also has a Steam workshop, which has a great number of mods that feature new maps, unit skins, increased turns per season and year, and many more things that can make the experience better and even squash out smaller bugs that the community has dubbed to fix themselves. Even though the overarching strategy, great battles, and fantastic pacing outshine the issues quite a bit, they can still prove frustrating if experienced one after another, over and over. If the player is careful enough to keep their units well spaced out from enemy lines until a proper charge can be made, and auto-resolves the unbearably sluggish and unresponsive naval combat, then most of the issues with Shogun 2 can be avoided almost entirely. All that said, Total War Shogun 2 from the Creative Assembly gets a 7 out of 10. Shogun 2 creates a wonderful mix of strategy and history, showcasing an era of great conflict and great people, even if a few smaller issues do keep it from reaching its true potential. Shogun 2 is currently available on Steam for $30, and until next time, guys, stay awesome.
刀は抜いた。敵方に一人でも生き残りがいる限り、この刀鞘には収める。すべてはお家のためじゃ。敵方では武田軍が待ち構えている。奇妙な旗印を掲げているからといって士気の低い臆病なたわけどもなどと侮るなかれ。地獄の鬼どもが束になって襲ってきたとてこの石垣を守り抜くと。だが当面の敵は鬼ではなく人間よって心配は無用じゃ。これだけは約束する。戦が終わったら忙しくなる。跳ねた敵の首を集めて数えんとならんからな。